Welcome to Love and Trauma, the real deal. I'm Danielle Sebastian, best-selling author, coach, and yes, I've been through the marriage trenches myself. This show is all about how to actually deal with trauma in relationships and make it work without losing your mind. If you're ready for honest talk, no fluff, and tools that cut through the noise, tune in, because let's face it, love can be a bit of a mess, but it's a mess worth figuring out. This is Love and Trauma, the real deal. Recap episode. We're rewinding to spotlight two unforgettable women whose wisdom lit up our show. Dr. R.G. Nichols and Coach Carmen Reeves Jenkins. First, we'll revisit the incredible journey of Dr. R.G. Nichols, whose roots on a cattle ranch in Arkansas and Cherokee heritage gave rise to a life built on kindness as leadership. But her path wasn't always smooth. Dr. RG faced childhood trauma and struggled in school early on, and yet she didn't just rise, she soared. With over 45 years of experience in education, entrepreneurship, and empowerment, Dr. RG showed us how blending compassion with courage can transform not just careers, but lives. Whether she was teaching architectural drafting or guiding women entrepreneurs, her message was clear. Kindness is not weakness, it's power. Then we dive back into the passionate, purpose-driven insights of Coach Carmen Reeves Jenkins. Carmen's childhood was also marked by trauma, and like Dr. RG, she was told she wasn't college material, but she proved every doubt wrong, earning a bachelor's and a master's degree, becoming a licensed independent clinical social worker, certified life coach, and retiring as a major in the Army Reserves. Today, as founder of Inner Healing for Abundant Living, Carmen empowers others to rewire harmful thought patterns, break generational cycles, and reclaim their joy. These two powerhouse women didn't just overcome trauma and academic struggles, they transformed them into tools of impact and inspiration. From underestimated girls to transformational leaders, their stories remind us that healing is possible and greatness often grows from the hardest beginnings. So get comfy, grab a journal, or just soak it all in, because these highlights are filled with the kind of wisdom that sticks with you long after the credits roll. Let's dive in.
I had one of the most amazing, amazing childhoods that any girl could ever wish for. So my Cherokee grandparents basically raised us because mom and dad were working. And then my Irish grandparents on the other side came into our life a little later. But just the combination of Cherokee and Irish might be a little scary for you.
It does kind of, yeah.
But I was a little redheaded country girl. I came out with fiery red hair, screaming and ready to light the world on fire. And I guess I haven't stopped since then. So growing up in the country, you know, as I look back on it, I think we might have been poor money-wise, but we didn't know that. We were so happy running barefoot through the meadows, chasing butterflies. I have an older brother who was my gatekeeper. He took care of me. He was my best friend. We were about 15 months apart, so we were raised like twins. We had adventures. I remember my mother reading us The Adventures of Huck Finn, and we had a river that ran through the ranch. And so the two of us at a very young age, and we were going to float the river like, Huck Finn did the Mississippi. But we had so much fun, so much fun. And then, of course, he grew up and went to school, and I was devastated. The yellow school bus picked him up and brought him home every day. And I was like, I don't understand. I've been with him since birth. I don't understand why I can't go to school with him. Well, I was 2 years behind him. And I finally got my chance. But what I didn't know, and that my brother caught on to very, very early, was that I was very dyslexic. We didn't know that word back then, but he knew that I didn't see numbers and letters like he did. So, being the genius that he was, he devised flashcards and different things at a very young age. He would be like first, second grade. And so when he came home from school, we would sit down with our little afternoon snack, and he would teach me everything that he picked up in school that day. So, of course, he was in the third grade, and by the time I started first grade, the teachers thought I was a genius. They had no idea that I was dyslexic because I had learned so much from him. We made it all the way through high school with our secret, very well kept secret.
Did he
And
help you that whole
the whole
time?
the whole time,
Really?
the whole time. And needless to say, I had very good grades, and so did he. But we were feeding off of each other. And I was thinking, well, what happens, when he left for college? What's going to happen to me? But thank goodness he had given me enough background to keep me going. And when I tell people that story, especially some of the ones that we went to school with, they were clueless. We kept that secret very close to our heart. I received an all expense paid 2 week stay at a leadership conference. Had the best 2 weeks of my life up there with other leaders from around the United States. And that's the story that I started with. It was such an honor to get that. And then the devastation came as I was coming back home. And apparently, my mother, I had disappointed my mother, and to this day, and I'll never know the answer to this, was why she was disappointed with me, because it was a tremendous honor. You would think she would be proud of me, and maybe in her way she was, but she never told me that. But coming back home, I missed my bus, um, the initial connection, and ended up in downtown Detroit, Michigan in the early 60s when there was a lot of riots and unrest. And I didn't know about any of that, but I was stuck in downtown Detroit at the bus station where most of the riots and deaths had occurred. Scared to death, no money, didn't know, if I was going to make my next connection, didn't know how I was going to get home. But some lovely white-haired lady assisted me after I'd had the brief conversation with my mother, and she said she didn't care if I ever came back home. And so I was boohooing, and the lovely lady came over, put her arms around me and said, "Honey, I don't know what's wrong, but I'll help you get home." And she did. She bought me a sandwich and a bottle of water, and she made sure I got on the bus, and I made it back home, and life went on from there. I guess that
Oh,
might
those angels stay with you forever, don't they?
forever.
And so that phone call with your mom,
Mhm.
did that really change everything with your relationship from
It
then on?
Yes, to say I was crushed was an understatement. I didn't understand why she was not pleased with me. I didn't understand why she didn't want me to ever come back home. I just, I've spent the rest of my remaining life trying to figure all this out, and maybe the only way I can justify it in my mind was maybe she was living a hard life and she just needed some type of a release. And yeah, it was probably around midnight. when I called her, and I'm sure I woke her up. Um, but that one incident changed me as a person because I said I would never treat another human being that way.
And you share about later in your life, probably that even worse than that phone call incident.
Well, there were many, but I think
Yeah.
the other one that stands out the most was me coming home from work one day, and I was a single mom and had been a single mom for several years and was very sick. I was diagnosed with cancer at when I was in my 20s. As it turned out, it wasn't cancer, it was an autoimmune disease, Hashimoto's to be exact. But back in that time frame, doctors didn't really know what it was or how to take care of it. I was very, very fortunate to give birth to my only son. And being a single mom, I had moved back home to the ranch because Papa was a little ill, and I wanted the two of us to share as much time with him as we could. But when I came home from work, I noticed my son didn't get off the bus. And mother finally sat me down and told me that she had given my son to my ex-husband. And I was like, what? What do you mean you gave my son away? Well, you've raised him for 10 years. Now it's time for him to know his dad and be raised by his dad. And needless to say, that was probably the biggest shock ever in my lifetime. But we turned that situation around as well. My son and I are very close. We've always been close. Um, while he was living with his dad, who was a coach at the time, and I always say that coaches walk to a different beat than most humans. But when Josh graduated from high school, he called his grandma and said, "Come and get me and take me to my mama's. I never want to be away from her again."
Tell me how living that way, and having that experience, how did that end up affecting some of your adult relationships?
Not very well. Um, my first husband was my high school sweetheart. My mother did not like him at all until I divorced him, and then apparently they became good friends. Um, I was looking for someone to save me, I think, from uh, the trauma and the turmoil, and that someone that I was looking for, I wanted that person to be exactly like my daddy because I was my daddy's little girl, so I thought. And everybody that I dated for those 15 years that I was single, honest to goodness, if I put them all in a box and shook the box up and pulled them out, they'd all look exactly like my daddy. They'd all have the same haircut, wear the same size pants, same size shoes. And it took me a long time to be able to see that. I mean,
Yeah.
I was looking for someone to take the place of my dad and to be that savior to save me. And I didn't love myself. I just wanted someone else to love me. And I was the person always trying to take care of them. And so, needless to say, that made for not very strong relationships. I guess that's why it took me so long to finally end up with my partner in life, my husband today, who is nothing like any of them. He doesn't look like them. He doesn't act like them. He's my other best friend, and he loves my brother as well.
What did you do after your divorce, that ended up making your second relationship a success?
I was dead set and determined not to ever go through any of that again. However, I did. There was a second marriage in there that only lasted for maybe 4 months. Um, there was some abuse, physical abuse from that. And I was emotionally scarred because I'd grown up with these grandparents that just loved me unconditionally. And then to go through those two ugly divorces.
Tell me about your career. I
Oh my
Where
goodness.
did this all fit in?
Discovered Frank Lloyd Wright, a not a local architect, but a very famous architect. And I just fell in love with his work. I'm
Mm.
talking, I was 5 or 6 years old when this was going on. So I used to lay out in the clover, watch the bees and the butterflies swirl around my head, and I would be dreaming about something Frank Lloyd Wright had designed or something. I always wanted to be an architect when I grew up. Well, when I went to college at the University of Arkansas, I started out in architecture school. Back in the day when I was the only woman in the School of Architecture. I very quickly got weeded out. I transferred schools and went into home interior design. Long story short, I got my degree in home ec, couldn't find a job at the time I graduated, and that
What kind of jobs were there for home ec? Tell me.
there weren't any.
Because my mom had a home ec degree too.
Yeah,
And
there
yeah,
didn't exist.
yeah.
I mean, I could have gotten a design job in Atlanta or another, but I had a young baby and I didn't want to move away from the ranch or that far away. And so I
Not
sacrificed.
a lot of design options
None
on the
on the
in the
ranch.
farm, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, the ranch.
not a lot to design.
No, no.
So anyway, a few years later, I decided I was going to slip in the back door of an architect firm. So I went and got a drafting degree because I already
Okay.
knew how to draw, but I thought I have to be somewhat official to apply for this. So it was a 2-year program, and I finished it in about a year and a half and graduated with honors. And then I came back to the area and applied for my first job. And it was with, you're not going to believe this, but one of the architects that started up at the University of Arkansas, and he remembered me, and he remembered how well I had, my projects and things, and he wanted to hire me. But at the time, all he had was a secretary's position, answering the phone, running blueprints, making coffee, $3.25 an hour. And I told him, I said, thank you very much for considering me, but I think I'm worth a little bit more than $3.25 an hour with all this education I have running out my ears.
Good for you. I bet that was hard.
It was.
Was it
So,
hard?
yeah,
Yeah.
very hard. So I ended up teaching drafting slash CAD, computer aided drafting, in a high school in Oklahoma, just over the state line. I've um, I've now gone full circle, and I ended up teaching CAD in college, and I ended up back at the University of Arkansas on the Fort Smith campus running the CAD program many, many years later. And we had one of the most award-winning Autodesk training centers in the world. We trained architects, engineers from all over the world. They flew in and we trained them. And this same architect finally called me and said, RG, I need you to train my entire firm on CAD because we've got to get off the hand drawing board and join the real world. Well, needless to say, I charged him a little bit more than $3.25 an hour for training his entire firm. But yeah, another small
That
circle.
also came full circle.
Yes. So I have been at the university for 32 years, teaching CAD up until just a few years ago when I switched over. I have a doctorate degree in leadership. So I let some of my other trained instructors take over the CAD portion, and I moved over to teach leadership courses. So full
That
circle
is
again.
amazing. Oh, your persistence and survival really played a big role. And also your kindness, because all these people remembered you,
Oh, absolutely.
the
I,
connections.
I have students scattered all over the world now. And I still get cards and letters and thank yous.
You've spent, this is, at least from your bio, it says 45 years inspiring and educating others.
Yes, and
What? Yeah.
I plan to continue doing that, even though I'm retiring in May from the university after 32 years with them and a total of 45 in education. But now my passion is helping women leave a financial legacy. And I don't mean just money. I mean, there's lots of other things that allow you to leave that legacy, kindness being one of them. Um, but I don't want women to think that if I lose my spouse, and now that I'm older, I see these things happening. Women are losing their spouses and they don't even know how to pump gas into their own vehicle. They've never had to, believe it or not, there are women out there that have never taken care of the finances, nor do they know how to do any of that. And it breaks my heart, just breaks my heart. And so I want to continue speaking to women and women's groups and letting them know about all the things. Oh, by the way, I forgot to tell you, I did sort of get a law degree in there too.
Okay, I thought so.
I kind of
Yeah.
worked that in.
Oh my goodness.
Not that I want to be an attorney. I didn't set for the board exams. I don't want to do that. But I needed the knowledge to know how to do all this, the wills, the trust, and how, to protect.
Oh, for the, okay, for
Yes,
the
yes.
entrepreneur, the women.
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
So I do have that knowledge, and I want to share that with other women to let them know how they can be successful and still leave a fulfilled, wonderful, kind life, even after they've lost their spouse.
Banging your head against the wall, trying to navigate the complexities of a relationship impacted by childhood trauma, it doesn't have to be this daunting. When you're married to a partner with unresolved childhood trauma, it can feel like you're walking on eggshells, never quite knowing what will set them off. No matter what you try, it feels like there's always something triggering another emotional response that seems completely out of context. And the harder you try to fix it, the more discouraged you feel. So what's the issue here? Navigating marriage with a trauma survivor is different. The love languages don't work. Date nights don't work. Self-help books don't help. But here's the good news. I've created something that does work. Something built from years of hard-earned lessons and real-life experience. Ready to take the first step toward real change? Let's talk. I'm offering a free one-on-one call where we'll dive into what's going on in your relationship and figure out a way forward together. This isn't just another quick chat. It's a chance to finally be heard, to share what you're going through with someone who truly gets it. No judgment, just real support. So if you're ready to start making sense of it all and find a little more peace in your marriage, book your free call now. Your happiness, your peace, and your relationship are worth it. Let's do it together.
Share and introduce myself as a little girl from Cleveland, Ohio, who is still adulting in this life. There's always some new nuances, and so I'm still on this adult journey. But my intention was to be as vulnerable and transparent as possible, in a way that it would help to inspire and encourage other women. I know that women, regardless of where we are in the world, we have all had some stressful, even sometimes traumatic experiences, and just wanted women to know that they're not alone and that nothing that has been a part of our life is wasted. It's, all to bring it to all together that we can have the best life possible and be able to lead others forward.
I think you did that very well in your chapter.
Oh, thank you so much.
So let's start sort of at the beginning. I would say that one of the events that you talk about in the book that significantly, changed you and kind of set the trajectory for your life was finding out when you were 8 years old that your biological father was not who you thought it was.
Yeah, it was actually my stepfather. And so from, as far back as I can remember, which is interesting how the brain works. The more I intentionally focus on remembering things, the more things come up. And so I can remember being probably around 3 or 4. I remember my first day of official school, and he was in my life at that time. He and my mother were actually married. And so, as a child, naturally, you think nothing different. So, they have the same last name. He's my dad. And whatever was going on in the adult aspect of things between them as a married couple, much of that I did not know and learn until I got much older. But there came a point in time, for whatever reason, that my mother and he were, I believe, on the verge of separating. And my mother felt that she needed to share with me that my biological father was actually not the man that I had known as my father. And so what subsequently happened, my stepfather and my mother separated. They subsequently, at some point in time, got a divorce. And my biological father and I began a relationship by the coordination of my mother. My biological father was actually in prison when I first met him. And so I don't know how I absorbed all of that, but somehow I did. And from, a psychological, therapeutic perspective, I know that it was absorbed in my body. And I have carried some things with me in my body for quite a long time. But the personality that I have, I just learned how to forge ahead. And so my mother took me, I remember very vividly the first time meeting my biological father. He was
Yeah,
in
so tell
prison.
me just about that.
Yeah.
So as soon as you found out you wanted to meet him,
Well, it was my mother's
tell me.
coordinating. I don't recall her really like asking me if I wanted to go.
Really?
It was
Okay.
more of, this is your dad, this is where he is, and we're going to be going to visit. I was a pretty compliant child until I got a little older. So I didn't really ask a whole lot of questions. And I was still quite young. And so I remember her and I riding the Greyhound bus to the area where he was incarcerated, and meeting him for the first time. And it was a good meeting. It was a good visit. I remember him very vividly coming out in his attire that kind of marks you as an inmate. But he was clean shaven, very low haircut, very attractive, dark skinned African American man. And I could, tell some visual relationships, we had the same kind of nose. And so he seemed to be very interested in me and asked me a lot of questions and really tried to connect. He and my mother seemed to have a very, agreeable conversation, which wasn't like the conversations that her and my stepfather had as we got closer to them separating.
Did he know about you from birth?
Yes. So what I later found out when I was much, much, much older,
Yes. The dirt.
that I actually had other siblings. And so, yes, he has always known. He actually fathered myself and my half sister at the same time frame. So my mother and her mother were both pregnant at the same time. So I have a sister that is about 7 to 10 days older than I. So he was a busy guy.
He was busy. Okay. Yes. And so when you found out that there was additional family members, did you reach out?
And so I didn't find that out. I don't recall exactly the duration of time. I know that when my biological father came, when he was paroled, he came to live with my mother and I. And I was in about the fifth, sixth grade. I remember it was like right around the time that I was getting ready to prepare to go to middle school. The middle school that when I grew up, we had seventh and eighth grade only in middle school. So I was still in elementary school, and he came to live with us. And it was about a year or so before I went to middle school. So somewhere between him living with us and my going to middle school is when I became aware that I had other siblings. So I actually have a sister that's about a week and a half older than I. And then I had two other siblings, but they have since passed away. So I have a brother that I'm about 5 years older than he. And then I had a sister who I was about 7 years older than. And so all of them were conceived during the time that he and my mother also had a relationship.
Oh, yes. And you were essentially raised as a single child.
Yeah, my mother and I, unfortunately, for various reasons, I believe there was just a lot of marital discord because my mother and father were never legally married. I actually later found out that he, whenever that took place, actually married the mother of my siblings. And that was a very contentious thing for my mother. She loved my father dearly and always wanted to be married to him. But for whatever reasons, that was not the case. And so at some point in time when I was in high school, they actually separated. And so I didn't directly reach out to my siblings. My father would actually take me to visit with them. And it, as a child, you're not comprehending all the nuances of things. But I could feel that they really weren't like connected to me. It was more of my father trying to bridge the connection. They weren't unkind or anything when I was around, but the only time that we had any interaction was when my father would take me to visit with them where they were.
Okay. And then your relationship, or your mom's relationship with the stepdad, was also pretty tumultuous.
It was, I think, around that time frame again, whenever my mother decided that marriage was no longer what she wanted. And I believe at some point she probably shared with him the reasons, and a part of those reasons was my father. And they had some volatility verbally, and even physically a few times. But then he moved out. Still, I maintained a relationship with him, and he with I, and even with some other family members on his side of the family. I had, who I felt were cousins that didn't live too far from my mother and I would go over to visit them. We actually were in the same high school together. So it did not impact the relationship I had with his side of the family, which was very different than the relationships I had with my biological father side of the family. So I was actually a little bit closer to my stepfather's family than I was to my biological father's family.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah, but you don't rationalize those things until you're
no, and I don't think
as
a kid that you think this is normal, right? Probably
right.
You didn't.
It
really
was my
know.
normal, so I didn't think anything different. Yeah.
So how did those personal experiences end up showing up, like when you started dating?
It took a while for me to realize that Carmen had some things to deal with.
I bet.
As a preteen and teenager, I thought I was doing good. I had many, I think, the imagination can be a wonderful thing. And so as a young child, being an only child, I did a lot of imaginative play. And, I vividly remember those things. And as a preteen, I would make my family. So I had friends that I hung out with and, cousins I would visit often. And so I filled the gap of what wasn't at home with other people and other family connections. And so those times were good. But in between those times, what I know now that I didn't know then is I had some depression. And there were moments where I would be really sad. And my mother pretty much categorized it as me being introverted and just kind of to myself. But what I know to be true as an adult is I was depressed.
And it sounds like you went to high school and then the military.
Yeah, so high school was my not really rebellious, but I think unconsciously I was trying to just overcome the obstacles. As normal teenagers do in their own way. I wanted to fit in, I wanted to be popular, I wanted to have friends. And so whatever it kind of took to do that, sometimes without my mother knowing,
yep,
I would be with the group, with the in crowd. To the point, again, because there was a void in me to wanting to belong to something and feel a part and feel connected. And I really feel that the core of that was just really wanting a healthy, holistic family. What I noticed, though, I struggled with academics. And so I think that, as an adult looking back, what I could say is I didn't have the attention and focus, and I didn't grasp some of the foundational core areas. And I can even remember in elementary school really struggling with grammar and sentence structure and arithmetic. And that really carried on throughout, really even still today. And so I think that some of my ability to learn was impacted by things happening at home.
Yeah. And maybe you just learned it differently than other people too, because you now have a degree, right?
Yeah, it's again, the brain is just amazing to me. I love studying the brain because it's just so phenomenal, the way that we are geared. So I learned how to adapt. I learned how to hide some things. And so I didn't take certain kind of classes because I knew I was going to struggle. I took what I had to take. And so, I did pretty well in anything that didn't have to do with grammar and math. So science was a challenge sometimes.
Focused on your strengths.
Oh my gosh. Remember that periodic table? We fought.
Brutal.
Yeah, but I graduated, with high school, not with honors, but I graduated, with pretty good average. But when I joined the military, which wasn't initially my idea.
Okay.
As I said, on the surface, I was pretty compliant. And so I think my mother had great wisdom that it really took me a long time to really not acknowledge that and understand it. But she knew some of the areas that I was struggling in and was going to struggle. And I'm like, I want to graduate and go to college. My mother's like, and who's going to pay for that? I think her way of saying you're not really much material right now was, how about look at some other options? And so I had two uncles that were in the Army during Vietnam, and they had since gotten out and were working for the bus system. And so she had a conversation with one of them. They were both her brothers. And so however they got together, they decided it would be a good idea for me to join the Army as well. And I was in my 11th grade of year of school. And so I vividly remember my mother making all the coordinations, and the recruiter came to our home, and we were all sitting at the table, and they were just talking and, making plans. And And I was just sitting there like, okay, I guess they'll tell me what I'm going to do.
Were you panicking? Were you panicking?
I wasn't
or
panicking.
not really?
I wasn't anxious. I just, I don't think I really knew what I was getting into.
Yeah.
And in spite of everything that had happened in my family, I still believed that my mother knew best and that I trusted her. And I didn't have any reason to not trust my uncle. He'd been in the army, and he did very well for the most part. And so I'm like, oh, okay, if I'm not going to college, I don't have any money to pay for me to go. I'm not getting any scholarships. And I didn't really know about grants. And so I thought, well, why not? But what I began to feel once I left home, and I think I still am. I'm the kind of person, if I'm going to do something, let's jump in and get it done. And so it wasn't even a full month after graduation that I left from home. I graduated in June and I left in July-ish. And so I didn't have any. Go ahead.
Where did you go? Where were you staying?
So I signed up to be a medical attendant. And so my first place of basic training everyone has to go through, regardless of the branch of service, for, learn about the military and make sure you're physically fit to fight and all those things. And so my basic training was in Alabama.
And then where did you get?
And then from there, my first official assignment was in Germany. And that was a culture shock.
That's a long ways away.
It was. And the only other time I had been to a foreign country was when I went on a trip vacation-wise to Puerto Rico. But this was like, okay, really, I'm by myself. And I really began to feel that. And with the adult adjustments, unconsciously, I started to feel a little resentful. And I started to harbor rough and gruff with my mother, when I would talk. And for me, it was the way of saying, I really didn't want to do this, but I did it because you thought it was a good idea. And this is hard for me. And I really would have rather been at home and going to college. So she and I really didn't get the opportunity to talk about that because I really didn't share it with her until a couple of years later. But I had harbored that for a while, to the point where when it was time to what we call re-enlist, I had told my mother I wasn't going to re-enlist.
Good for you.
I was trying to get a message to her.
Was that hard? Was it hard?
It wasn't hard, but I ended up re-enlisting. So I think I was a little conflicted.
Oh.
And I think I kind of wanted her to feel my pain a little bit. Yeah. But outwardly, what most of my family members said, and still today, is, but you've always done really well. We didn't know you were having a problem.
You held it so well, girl.
Yeah, because I had that, way of just learning how to adapt. And I never really shared my, heart feelings earlier on in my life. I just did what I had to do. But once my mother and I really sat down and had a talk about it, she was like, well, why didn't you tell me that earlier? I love my mother. I love my father. And I didn't want to be a burden for them or put a burden on them. So I kind of shouldered it myself.
Tell me about meeting your husband. Warmth and radical resilience. As we wrap up this special recap episode of Love and Trauma, The Real Deal, I'm walking away with 3 big takeaways from these 2 powerful conversations that I just have to share. Number 1, your past doesn't disqualify you. It prepares you. Both Dr. RG and Coach Carmen faced trauma and early setbacks that could have written a very different story. But instead of giving in to what happened to them, they rewrote the narrative. They didn't just survive, they transformed. And that reminder, it's a gift for all of us, still healing and still rising. Number 2, education isn't about how you start, it's about how you finish. Both of these incredible women were once told they wouldn't make it academically, and now look at them. Degrees, titles, legacies, whether you're going back to school, picking up a new skill, or just trying to believe in yourself again, it's never too late to grow, learn, and rise. And number 3, kindness and healing are powerful leadership tools. Both of these women, you could feel the kindness coming from them. And together, they showed us that true leadership doesn't come from perfection. It comes from being real and using your story to light the way for others. I hope this episode filled you up like it did me. And if these women inspired you, take a moment to reflect. What's one story in your life you're ready to rewrite? Until next time, we'll see you later.
All right, that's a wrap for today on Love and Trauma, the real deal. Big thanks to my guests for sharing their insights. Couldn't have done it without you. Now, for those of you looking to take this journey further, I've got something special. Head to my website to grab Real Tactics, Real Healing, a survivor's playbook for navigating a relationship with a trauma survivor. It's packed with everything you need to know, do, and say to navigate the emotional minefield, find your balance, and regain your self-worth and happiness.